Dr. Kay Linker, welcome to Podcastina.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so excited to have you. Can you tell me a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so I did my PhD in neuroscience at UC Irvine and then postdoced at UCLA, also neuroscience. And now I work at a precision medicine company and post on socials about neuroscience and longevity stuff.
I love that. Was there a reason you wanted to go into longevity specifically?
Yeah, so I actually used to study dopamine and addiction, but I got so interested in optimizing performance, and I feel like the longevity field has really taken that to levels that you can use in your day-to-day, but also actually help how you feel day-to-day and live longer. So I just became like obsessed with making myself feel better and using science to do so.
Oh, I love that. And here's the thing, like selfishly, my curiosity is in that. And at the moment, it just feels like a boys' club.
Yes, it really is. There's like very few female creators. Biohacking is like so male dominated, but it doesn't make any sense because we've been biohacking forever. Like all the creams we use, every time we go to the med spa, it's just sort of a different angle.
Yeah, they call it biohacking when it's boys, and they call it vanity when it's women.
Exactly.
Okay, selfishly, I wanted to get in on a little tangent about creatine because I started taking it recently and I feel like I have felt better. So can you talk to me about that?
Yeah, so creatine is an interesting one because it's usually used by like buff guys trying to get buffer at the gym, but there's actually more and more evidence showing that it helps the brain. And the reason that it's able to do that is because it actually helps energy production. So it can help your mitochondria create more ATP from the same glucose molecule. And the brain is so it's an energy sucker. It takes up so much ATP. It requires 20% of your body's energy, even though it's only like 4%. So it's an incredibly, it's an organ that needs so much energy. And so creatine really helps optimize that. And the first studies were done in traumatic brain injury where patients that were taking creatine and when they had a TBI, they were less likely to have negative neurological impacts compared to those without taking creatine. And then this led into more studies showing that it improved mood, it improved memory, it improved cognitive performance. And I think we're honestly just at the tipping point of creatine in terms of cognitive performance and cognitive benefit, and maybe even cognitive longevity. We'll see.
No, that's really exciting because I initially started taking it for muscle growth too, and then stumbling upon all the cognitive benefits is just like icing on the cake. I wanted to talk to you about biohacking, energy for the brain. What other things can we tap into that aren't caffeine?
Yeah, so number one is obviously to be metabolically healthy. So when you're metabolically unhealthy and you have too much glucose too many times, your cells are not able to take up that glucose as well. It's almost like water everywhere with not a drop to drink. So you really want to make sure that you're not spiking your glucose. If you have, a big meal, take a walk after. That's been shown to be just as effective as metformin, which is a diabetic drug, but also a longevity drug. Another one that's great is sauna. So sauna has really been shown to improve cognitive longevity in terms of reducing your risk of dementia. So sauning 4 times a week can reduce your risk of dementia and Alzheimer's by 67%, which is pretty amazing. It's huge. So you want to make sure you're doing at like a temp of 175 to 200, 4 times a week, 20 minutes, and you will have incredible benefits long term, but you'll also notice short term mood changes. And the reason is because it actually can make your mu opioid receptors, which is like what drugs of abuse bind to, but it's also what endorphins bind to, more sensitive. So you're more sensitive to pleasurable experiences. So it's immediate mood and then long term, like lower risk of neurodegeneration.
Incredible. That's another thing that I do. I'm such a gym bro, like stuck in a woman's body. I'm very fortunate. I have a sauna in my building, so I go all the time. So good to know. So it's 175 to 200, 20-minute increments. Is there a difference between if somebody is doing like an infrared sauna versus just the traditional sauna?
Yeah, so there's a little bit of a debate on this, and the original studies were done in Finnish saunas. And the reason there's a debate is because infrared saunas tend to heat your skin more than your core. So there could be an argument that if you're not heating the core as much, that you're not going to get those benefits biologically. But infrared saunas have other benefits for mitochondrial function. It can improve ATP synthesis, and that's why people use it for skin health and also other injuries, even like ocular injuries. So I think if you have an infrared sauna, don't throw it out or, don't replace it. But if you have to choose, I would choose a Finnish.
Good to know. And I feel like just because that's the more common sauna that we see, that there's more studies for that one.
Yeah. And I think, honestly, I think we'll see in the next 5-10 years how this shakes out as more infrared saunas come up, and hopefully they're the same. But yeah, we don't really know yet. It's probably the same, but we don't know yet.
We'll find out. So the obvious things are all seeming to be the answers. Work out, go in the sauna more, eat less sugar. Can you talk to me about the impact that sleep has on cognitive abilities?
I mean, even just sort of on a very short-term basis, if you don't have good sleep, how are you going to make good decisions the next day? It's so much harder. You're tired, you're hungrier, you actually have higher levels of ghrelin, which is your hunger hormone. And also when you eat unhealthy, you have a higher insulin response. So everything gets worse when you get sleepier, not only in terms of the choices that you make, but also how those choices impact your biology. And then longer term, less sleep is correlated with increased risk of neurodegeneration, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, even worsening symptoms of something like Huntington's, which is it's genetic. So it's absolutely essential for our health, and we have to prioritize it. Yeah, I used to be the sleep when you're dead person, but no.
No, me too. Not anymore. So, like I said, all of these longevity things, they kind of feel like a little bit of a boys' club. You've got the Brian Johnsons of the world, for anybody that knows that reference. And it just doesn't feel like there's enough women in the field.
Yeah, I do have to give a shout out, though, to my friend Kayla Barnes. She's the female Brian Johnson, and she's amazing. So go check her out if you're interested in female longevity protocols. She's the best.
This is why I feel like we're lacking information in this area of it. Because I wanted to talk to you about, how does the decline in estrogen impact our cognitive function?
Yeah, so estrogen is very neuroprotective, and it's because it's actually a massive regulator of transcription. So when we say hormones affect everything, it's because they actually can drive straight into the cell's nucleus, change their transcriptional code, and change the fundamental biologies of a cell. In the brain, what this means is when there's more estrogen, there's more synapses, there's more connections between neurons, there's more BDNF, which is a brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is great for memory. You have more memory, you have more verbal memory, you have more attention span. You also have higher baseline levels of dopamine and acetylcholine. So estrogen is not just something that, helps your ovaries cycle. It's also really important for your brain and other parts of your body.
So does that mean as we approach menopause and our estrogen levels fall off, is cognitive decline inevitable?
So this is where I would highly recommend anyone who's ready for it talk to their doctor about hormone replacement therapy. The Women's Health Initiative years ago really destroyed so many women's access to HRT, and now we have bioidentical hormones. So if you're getting close to that path, definitely consider talking to your doctor, because if you start hormone replacement therapy prior to menopause, so really early menopause or late perimenopause, you will have cognitive benefits. We don't see that as much in women who are already postmenopausal. They don't tend to have the same cognitive benefits, probably because you already have those structural changes from the lack of estrogen for so long.
Yikes.
Yeah.
No, it's good we're having a dialogue about it, because I haven't really heard the decline in estrogen or just the changes in hormones in general and how it impacts us, other than hearing about someone's pregnant, so they get pregnancy brain and things are out of sorts that way, or that there's mood swings when we're going through perimenopause. And
one thing that's actually really interesting, I read a great paper that really looked at, again, mitochondrial health and metabolic health in terms of estrogen's impact on the psychological deficits during menopause and perimenopause, and the vast majority of people that were metabolically healthy had way less symptoms across the board, not just hot flashes, but also brain fog and memory displacement and, not being able to remember where your keys are, those types of things. If you were metabolically healthy, you're much less likely to experience those symptoms.
Good
so
to
another check on the eat healthy box.
Good to know. I want to ask this. I don't know if this is anecdotal or if you're familiar with research about this. I'm in my mid-30s and I feel like the women around me, my age, they seem to be going into perimenopause earlier. Is that true, or is that just something I feel like I'm hearing about?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I think there's two phenomenon going on right now. So I looked into this, and actually perimenopause and menopause compared to 50 years ago is actually shifted a little bit later. I think part of this might be because of the massive reduction in smoking, which impacts that. But I think we're seeing an increase in infertility as well as early perimenopause, again, because of this metabolic issue. So both PCOS and and early perimenopause are increased by metabolic dysfunction. And one thing that's really interesting is that your gut microbiome can actually affect your estrogen levels.
Whoa.
So if you have a gut flora that's very vibrant and you have many different species, it can create an enzyme that releases free estrogen. So it really affects your circulating estrogen if you have a healthy gut microbiome. And the reality is most of the food that's available to us destroys our gut. So that would be my guess as to why we're seeing that phenomenon.
It's scary because I feel like we can only account so much for environmental factors. I can say I'm going to buy organically sourced. I can try to go out of my way to eat healthy food, but there's only so much I can control as far as like what's happening to my food before I get to it. So the question environmentally is, when you look at the impact of what's happening to our groceries, things like air quality, right? Like in LA over the last month, we've been experiencing all these issues with the air quality post fires. Like, what are we supposed to do to mitigate it? Should we just go live in the woods?
Yeah, honestly, the LA fires, it really has wrecked our health. I know that sounds really scary to say, but the air quality was so bad. And the issue is typically if you want to buy great groceries, you want to buy local, right? Seasonal and local. But now that we live in LA, you do not want to buy local. All of that soil is going to be destroyed for maybe years. Yeah. So I guess, try to get organic produce sourced outside of LA and associated areas. And in terms of the air quality, make sure you have HEPA air filters. Now we've had some rain, and the weight of it will bring down the VOCs that cause us cancer and other inflammatory diseases. So going outside is probably okay now. But yeah, it's really sad to see what this is going to do to our health. And of course, obviously, everyone who lost their homes.
So are there supplements that we can take that can combat the environmental factors that we can't control? Because again, we can only do so much. And I'm just wondering if there's anything that we can add to our protocol that's going to help offset the environmental factor as much as we can.
Yeah, so the best studied molecule for this is called sulforaphane. And there was 2 clinical trials, one in China and I think one in India, that showed it can actually reduce your blood levels of benzene and other toxic molecules that cause cancer. And so actually a lot of firefighters take sulforaphane, and there's a specific company called Brockshot. I have no affiliation with them, but they give one supplement to a firefighter for every one that you purchase. And there's other ones out there. You can also eat broccoli sprouts or broccoli. The only thing is you can't cook the broccoli, or if you do, it needs to be steamed for 2 minutes max. But you can put it in a blender, sometimes in a smoothie. It doesn't taste as bad.
Oh, broccoli has such a bad rap.
I know. It's because it's quite strong.
I think broccoli is actually more disgusting cooked. I just can't tolerate the smell of it when it's warmed. So
it's worse when it's well, you're never going to get cancer then. You're going to have lots of sulforaphane.
Well, I didn't say I eat it. Back to cognitive decline. How much of it is genetic, and what percentage can we actually account for with behaviors?
Yeah, so Aging overall is 75% our environment and our choices. So only 25% is genetic. There are specific genes that are different, right? Again, Huntington's disease is a dominant genetic disorder where if you have that gene, you will get Huntington's. But for most of us, we can control the vast majority of it. And it really comes down to having a healthy lifestyle, sauna use, exercising regularly, and in particular aerobic exercise. So I know we're all very interested in strength training and building muscle, especially as women. We are more prone to sarcopenia, which is sort of bone loss from muscle loss. But aerobic fitness is really the key in terms of preventing cognitive decline. And it's because of this vascularization that comes from a heavy workout where your blood is pumping. So the veins in our brain are 90% of them are thinner than a strand of hair. So that architecture is very, very sensitive to any disruption. And that provides nutrients, it provides oxygen, it provides ATP. So you want to make sure that vasculature is really intact. And to do that, you really want to be doing aerobic activity.
What would be an ideal split for someone that works out, let's say, like 2 to 3 times a week?
Yeah, so I would say 1 to 2 days of VO2 max training, and you can work up to that. So what that is 4 minutes of sprinting or running as fast as you can, and then 4 minutes of rest, and then repeat that 4 times. So it's 32 minutes. It sounds like intense, but it's actually probably your quickest workout of the week. So do that 1 to 2 times a week. You can work your way up. Some people do 3. I don't. I started getting too tired. And then you want to make sure you're getting zone 2 in. And what zone 2 is it really helps your mitochondria with aerobic efficiency, which is, again, really important for brain health and ties into this metabolic health. And it's also, if you're interested in losing fat, it's like the best way to lose weight. What that looks like is being able to walk and have a conversation, but it's a little bit hard. You can, if you have a heart rate monitor, you can also measure this on your heart rate monitor. For me, I like to do an incline on a treadmill. I'll read a book, I'll watch a movie, and it's much more pleasant than VO2 max.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know if most people have heard about like the VO2 max stuff. I have, just because I kind of geek out on this stuff a little bit, but I thought you just have to go so hard for 4 minutes, and that's easier said than done. Can you talk to me about where's your heart rate even supposed to be if you are trying to do those 4-minute splits?
Yeah, so it's typically 200 minus your age, but everyone's different. So genetically, I have a higher resting heart rate, and I can get to higher heart rates. I get it from my dad. He's the same way. So I can get to 10 BPM higher than I'm supposed to. Just because of my genetics. So just try to run as fast as you can for a bit. And if you have a heart rate monitor, check it out, and then you'll know. It'll tell you if you have an Oura ring. It'll say what zone you're in.
Okay, that's good though, because that means there's recreational exercises that people can do. Maybe there's hobbies that they turn to, and they're still getting some of those benefits, but without doing that exact 4 minutes on, 4 minutes off. What kind of benefit are you getting if you just do, let's say, a spin class?
Yeah, for sure. So that type of split is really just optimizing to improve your VO2 max, but you can just do other aerobic efficiency. So a spin class, you probably will hit sections where you're hitting your zone 5, which is what you're sprinting in the VO2 max training. You'll also probably hit sections of zone 2. It's just not as efficient in terms of getting the benefits. So that's why I do that split. It's just more efficient, and that's what high performance athletes do. They do these types of splits because it's the best way to improve your aerobic efficiency and your performance.
Does strength training and weightlifting also have cognitive benefits?
So there's more evidence coming out now that myokines may have beneficial effects on BDNF within the brain. In addition, when you have muscle and you eat something that gives you a glucose spike, if you have enough muscle, it'll get shuttled to the muscle instead of going to your brain or causing, all the negative things that we've talked about in terms of having too much glucose and poor metabolic health. So I think everyone should be strength training, there's no doubt, but we just should not give up on aerobic training. We got to keep that in the loop. It's important too.
Fair enough. Okay. What other cognitive decline differences are there between men and women?
Yeah, so a big one actually circles back to estrogen, and estrogen increases baseline levels of dopamine. Dopamine degradation is a huge part of Parkinson's disease, and men are twice as likely to develop Parkinson's disease as women. And when they have Parkinson's disease, they tend to be more severe. So estrogen is really neuroprotective for us in terms of our brain benefits. And that's pretty much true across most psychiatric conditions, except for anxiety and depression. But for Alzheimer's, we have a slight more occurrence. And this is actually thought to be through something called the locus coeruleus, which is this small brain area, but it projects all over the brain. It's important in terms of gauging focus, but also fear. And women have a higher gauge on that in terms of like dialing towards fear. And that tends to degrade faster in women compared to men. And this could be why we have an increased incidence of Alzheimer's.
Is our amygdala bigger just because it's so much less safe for us in the world?
So weirdly enough, this is what's weird is our amygdala is actually smaller than men's. But the reason that we have more sort of anxiety and depression states is this locus coeruleus region. So we have 20% more neurons in this region, and they have far more synapses and connections. So this region is interesting because it exists on a curve where a little bit of activation provides focus, alertness. A lot of activation provides anxiety and fear. So ours is more sensitive, so we're going to be more tuned to have more anxiety and fear. But also, if we're able to sort of hone that in, we can have longer periods of focus compared to men. Also, because there's this enzyme called COMT, we have less of it, and it breaks down norepinephrine, which is what the locus coeruleus spits out to either signal focus or fear. And so our signals last longer. And that also could contribute to why we have more anxiety. We're twice as likely to have anxiety as men, and 1 in 3 women will meet the criteria for having an anxiety disorder in her lifetime. So it's very prevalent.
So, I mean, this is just, again, anecdotal, but I was on birth control for approximately 12, 13 years. And when I got off of it, I felt like what I thought was just my baseline of anxiety went down. So now after that, I'm very curious, did having my estrogen regulated like that, did having additional estrogen from the birth control, was that contributing to my anxiety? Can you speak to that?
Honestly, I'm not sure. Obviously, we know that estrogen can change baseline levels of dopamine, acetylcholine, and other aspects of the brain that could be driving some of your anxiety. But I also was put on birth control at like 16 and got off, I don't know, a few years ago. I was on it for like 10 years. And I think we're just starting to uncover the impacts both in brain and body on long-term birth control use, because it's not normal to put like kids on birth control. I don't know why it became so normal. So normal. Yeah. I'm curious to see like what shakes out in terms of research for that, because I haven't seen anything yet, but we'll see.
Is there a correlation between being someone who has a lot of anxiety, maybe excess anxiety, and their ability to produce dopamine?
That's a great question, because I think sometimes we see in go-getters or people that are obsessively career driven, they tend to also be like have almost like an addictive like personality, where anxiety is a double-edged sword to that. So norepinephrine, if we consider that sort of an anxiety-inducing molecule, can change levels of dopamine, and it can sensitize receptors to the same levels of dopamine, so they fire more even when you have the same level of dopamine. So I feel like there could be an association between that anxiety and your changing in levels of dopamine. But dopamine's a weird molecule because I think people think of it as reward, but it's really motivation. It's motivation to complete a task rather than the reward that you get from it.
That is, yeah, I had that wrong.
Most people, it's because drugs of abuse increase dopamine, but actually what drives addiction and what drives continued drug use is the thought of having it more than the drug itself. Obviously, people get high and it has an effect psychologically, but what drives addiction is that dopamine prior to getting the drug that drives action. So dopamine's really this neuromolecule of habits, action selection, motor, and motivation.
Okay, so I like to talk about how I have a to-do list on my phone, and when I get something done on the to-do list and I hit the button in the app, it gives me a little ping. So was my dopamine hit not coming from the ping? It was coming from whatever activity it was that was like leading up to getting the ping?
That's an interesting question. So it's basically a cue that's associated with your action. So you would probably get a dopamine spike right before you do the action, and then a smaller one when you hear the ping.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, I definitely operate similar to that, where I do get a lot of my self-worth from productivity, and I'm always judging myself like, oh, I'm so lazy, even though I think I have a hard time like pathologizing that, because I think because I have that anxiety, I probably do get more done than the average person.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I'm like obsessive, career driven. I need to get everything on my to-do list done. Yeah, I think it's this weird sort of double-edged sword of it makes you probably better at what you do and makes you more productive, but then maybe it's also not so pleasant to be inside your head at all times.
Yeah. That's the polite way of putting it, that's for sure. So, okay, with dopamine, is there a difference between men and women? Is one of us maybe better at producing it than the other, just on average?
Yeah. So there are differences in between men and women with dopamine. So one, women have higher levels of baseline dopamine because of our estrogen. It increases baseline levels of dopamine, and we have more of it in our brain compared to men, although they of course have some. And in addition, we actually are better at forming habits. So we have higher levels of something called D2 receptors, which is a type of dopamine receptor in a brain region called the striatum. And this region with those receptors drives habit formation. And so because we have more of these D2 receptors within the striatum, we are more capable of forming habits. But what's interesting is it's actually harder for us to form sort of the initial action. So we're better at maintaining systems and habits, but it's a little bit harder for us to actually initiate those. So because we have higher levels of estrogen in our follicular phase, we have higher levels of dopamine. You want to start your habit initiation in your follicular phase and then maintain it through your luteal phase, because you'll actually have more of those D2 receptors within the striatum that will drive that habit formation and bring it home for you. So it's a system you can stick to.
Oh my God. That's the most useful information I've ever heard. Okay, put it in my veins. Oh my gosh. If anyone doesn't know, so then what phase of the period is that?
Yes. So this is right actually as your period starts. So people sometimes think your luteal phase is during your period, but that's actually the start of your follicular phase. And that's why most women actually say, like, once my period starts, I feel better. At least that's how I feel. It's really like the few days leading up to it that is the most negative. And then after you ovulate, that's the luteal phase. So depending on your cycle, that's typically about 14 days after your period start is when your luteal phase starts.
Okay, let's use this example. Someone is trying to tackle like a big project. Maybe they want to learn how to keep their bathroom more clean or just build a better habit. Is there a time of the month that's the best point to start doing that?
Yeah, the estrogen will be highest while you're ovulating, but then it's going to drop during your luteal phase. So I would start it earlier and then keep the habit going, because sometimes the first day of the habit is like the easiest because you're motivated, you're inspired, and then it kind of dwindles. So starting it at the beginning of your follicular phase, and then hopefully by your luteal phase, you can hold on to it.
Oh, we have superpowers. I love it so much. Another one of the big like biohacking things that the bros do is taking an ice bath, because it's supposed to like help motivate you, keep your energy up during the day. But another thing that I've heard is that ice baths may not be as beneficial for women because it might cause a spike in cortisol for us. Can you speak on that?
Yeah, so women in general are more sensitive to quote unquote hormetic stressors. Hormetic stressors are stressors that are good for you in small doses, and they can improve your resilience. That's what a cold bath is. It improves your resilience. It can do so by increasing norepinephrine and dopamine. But like we talked about previously, women are much more sensitive and have longer signals of that norepinephrine. So when a man goes in a cold bath, he gets a spike of norepinephrine that, is not as high as a woman's, and it doesn't last as long. When we go in, because of our locus coeruleus, the architecture that we have in our brain, it is stronger and lasts longer. So we want to go in warmer temperatures and probably for shorter periods of time. And you may want to restrict it to your follicular phase.
Good to know.
I'll do a cold shower after a sauna, but in general, I don't find them energizing. I find they can really actually slow me down. I've done a few and I was just like exhausted after. So I think it's one of those just golden truths of like, listen to your body. Like if it doesn't work for you, don't do it, because most of these protocols are by men and for men. And so we have to figure out our own protocols.
Okay, see, this is where it's so beneficial to have this conversation, because no one talks about this, right? Like I just don't hear as much evidence for women and how the ice bath is going to be for us.
No one talks about, also all those studies were done in men.
Yeah.
Every single one. So yeah, no one's talking about how this affects the female body differently. And I feel like we're just starting to accept that there are sex differences within the brain as like a real biological variable.
So what's our alternative?
So in terms of elevating dopamine, because you don't want to have another coffee or something, going for an afternoon walk is a great way. It's been shown to lower cortisol and increase dopamine as well as acetylcholine, especially if it's done in nature, even if it's quote unquote manicured nature, which is like, we live in LA. That's the nature that we have. Even if you do like a cold shower, those are not as cold. And you can adjust it to the time that you want and the temperature that you want. Also, there's something called L-tyrosine that I've become interested in. It can increase, it's basically like a dopamine precursor. Just don't take it at night because it can increase your energy levels.
And this is a supplement?
Mm-hmm.
No, good. Thank you. Because I'm always looking for the alternatives. Like, what can we do that isn't caffeine and that isn't just something the boys are doing?
Yeah. I think we're going to start to discover more as we get into more of like the female biohacking space, because we're just going to have to do our own experiments on ourselves because there's just really not much data out there.
How much are we ruining our dopamine systems with our phones?
Yeah, so if you spend 2 hours a day on social media, you will have a 30% reduction in attention.
Oh, 2 hours is nothing. And I'm making this face because I don't know anybody with like an under 2 hour a day screen time.
Yeah, it's really, it's a tough one. But one thing I think we can do is change our relationship to social media. I still use it regularly. I'm on it too much, but I try to go in with an intention versus going in to like scroll. But or at least for me, I was watching myself do this and I would literally get caught up in something else. And I'm like, wait, how did I get here? I meant to do X, Y, Z. And now I'm in my For You page scrolling. I don't even know how we got here. So having that as a practice. There's also different apps. I use this app called Opal, which like locks you out of your social media apps and you can't get back in because there's timers within the Apple iOS system, but you can just click ignore.
Yeah, they don't help.
Yeah, so this one actually has it so like you cannot get in, which is great too if you have a focus work bit or you really need to just have a project that you're focusing on. And in terms of that, it's been shown that if you are able to have 60 to 90 minute work blocks where you're fully focused, deep work, you can improve your prefrontal cortex and anterior cingulate cortex connectivity, as well as the white matter thickness and some metrics of acetylcholine, which are all really important for attention. So you can get your attention back. You just have to be intentional about it by having those deep work blocks and using social media wisely.
With me, like when I'm trying to sit down and I'm trying to concentrate and do a block of work, I have to like throw my phone behind me because the temptation to grab it is just so big and it kind of just overtakes me. So if I put it out of reach, I feel like that helps.
Yeah, and out of eyesight too.
Yeah.
You can't see the cue. Again, women are actually more susceptible to cue-induced reinforcements. So the phone is reinforcing and we're more, and if you see it, you're going to be more sensitive to that cue of seeing it. So yeah, out of sight, out of mind.
Are there any types of reminders we can give ourselves while we're in the scroll that could snap us out of it?
I mean, you could set a timer before going in. I think it's hard to enter it without an intention, because its whole job is to grab every scrap of attention that you have. So trying to set up boundaries prior to entering, the phone, where it's just literally trying to grab every single piece of attention that you have, is going to be easier than trying to pull yourself out of it. It's like trying to get someone drunk to like talk rationally. It's like you do it before, like you don't do it during.
That's good. So the concentrated periods of focus, deep work, 60 to 90 minutes. Do you have to start at 60 to 90 minutes, or can we do smaller blocks and like work our way up to it?
No, definitely work your way up. Yeah, especially if you haven't done that in a long time. Start with 30, do that for a couple weeks, work your way up to 60, or you could match it with your cycle. So month 1, you start this habit of 30 minutes in your follicular phase, you keep it in your luteal, and then month 2, you go to 60, month 3, 90.
Okay, so for me, I want to ask, is it helpful to have anything in the background? Because sometimes, especially if I'm trying to write, and that's a thing that I get really distracted with, I feel like I can't take the silence either, so I'll turn music on. Is that helpful? Like, should we be having things running in the background to kind of offset things?
Yeah, so I've used both focus hertz, like binaural beats, which does help. You can use 40 to 80 hertz. You can, if you just put that in Spotify, you'll find it. But I also just use like wordless music sometimes, because I'm the same. I can't have silence. I work better with like a little bit of background noise.
Is there something that you know about dopamine that you feel like should be common knowledge and isn't?
That's a great question. I'm trying to think what I haven't talked about yet. So I think most people don't realize that dopamine does different things in different regions of the brain. So if you think about our brain, we obviously are this supercomputer, lying between our ears, but we actually only have 4 main neurotransmitters, and they control every thought, every action, every fiber of our being. And dopamine in sort of one region of the brain called the nucleus accumbens drives action for reward. Whereas in the prefrontal cortex, the same molecule actually drives you to not do that reward. So it's this very complex and interesting dynamic where different regions of the brain, dopamine has different, sometimes opposing actions for the ultimate action that you're going to take.
I didn't know that. See?
It's complicated. The brain's complicated.
I wanted to ask, do we lose our ability to make dopamine as we age?
So we lose a little bit, but not nearly as much as men. And actually, because of the nature of the amount of dopamine you need for sort of rewarding tasks versus motor tasks, the lower levels of dopamine is not going to actualize itself in sort of less motivation. It's going to actualize itself in things like Parkinson's, even just shaky hands or just having less motor control. But actually, one thing that most people don't talk about with that is you can have a motor cognitive reserve. So people talk about cognitive reserve like lifelong learners, extra education. But if you do complex motor tasks like racket sports or complex yoga routines or even choreography, this can improve your motor cognitive reserve, which is beneficial for your entire brain, including your dopamine levels.
Talk to me about the relationship between dopamine and getting a big project done, like big, starting a new business, or maybe even like getting out of a big relationship, like some massive life change, right? What does that take from us and require from us with anything cognitive like dopamine? What part does that play?
Yeah, so when you have a really big project, you sort of have both a combination of goal-directed behavior and habits. So when you first start the project, you're really excited just by the idea and you're motivated. That's your sort of goal-directed action. But as time goes on, motivation wanes and you rely on your systems, and that is your habits. And dopamine's involved in both. So dopamine in the nucleus accumbens really can drive that goal-directed behavior and other parts of the more ventral striatum. But as you get into habits, you're going into those D2 receptors within the dorsal striatum, which we have more of, and that's why we're better at making habits. So it's really these two opposing systems that feed into one another. Habits develop from the initial goal-directed action. Once it's repeated enough, it's a system. You don't think about it. It's routine. And so for big projects, you really need your habits because the motivation is going to wane. It's not going to be there 24/7.
And for something like that, if you want to get over just the initial hump of, oh, I'm going to start a business, I don't even know what to call it first. Is there a way that you can kind of think about it from a dopamine standpoint to be like, okay, well, if I just do like basically the eat the frog question, right? Are you supposed to do the hardest thing first? Or are you supposed to sit back and be like, okay, I can come up with a logo or I can, do the things I'm okay with doing first?
Yeah, so I think part of that is interpsychiatric variability. So everyone's different. So if you're the person that needs to get the biggest task done first, then do that. But I think everyone is common in that you want to have a reinforcement schedule that's tightly tied to the behavior. So all animals learn better when the reward is closely tied to the action. So if you do something, reward yourself immediately after. Or if you're training someone, you want to reward them immediately after. And so having that sort of tight regulation of reinforcement with action is crucial for getting yourself to do more things. Yeah.
Is there a relationship between dopamine and like people who make excuses a lot, who don't want to do things? Are they just not able to tap into that system for themselves?
It could be, yeah. So one, it could be that their dopamine is not tied to that. They have other motivations and that is not rewarding for them. So they don't have any, dopamine spikes when they have a cue to initiate that action or send that email or do whatever. Another is if they have a lot of anxiety, this could impact their action choice or action selection. So they could have, plenty of dopamine, but they have debilitating anxiety that's not going to allow them to create that choice. So it's hard. That neurotransmitter does so many things. So everyone's different, and someone's rationale or reasoning for not doing something could be beyond dopamine.
It's a hurdle. It's definitely a huge hurdle because I'm trying to think, like, if you want to help someone, what kind of system to suggest for them to try out that perhaps they haven't tried out motivation-wise?
Yeah. So I think one, make sure that you know what you want. If you don't know what you want, there's no point in doing anything. So having like regular self-reflection, like I love to journal and do a full like recount of what I've done each month and how that aligns with my broader goals, because it just keeps you on track of like, okay, what do I really want from my life? And I think also not everyone can design and architect their life in however they want. And it may require a lot of work, but you can do whatever you want with your life. The issue is I think some people don't want to do that. They just want to chill. They are happy, doing whatever they want on the weekends and working a job that they don't love because they have a pottery class that they love. So it's just, I feel like also different lifestyles for different people. But if you want to make something of your life, or you want to quit your job, or you want to do this, then I think it's really about structure and committing time every single day to your dream, because I forget the exact quote, but it's like a small task every day will outperform any Herculean task once a month, because little changes add up over time. Even though you can't see it, when you look back in a year, you'll be like, wow, that really made a difference.
It's so ridiculous to be saying this quote. I heard it and I wrote it down and I was like, there will come a time when I'm going to use this. But it's small steps, long vision, Pitbull.
Oh my God. But yes.
Not the guy I thought I would go to, but there he was.
He's wise.
With that golden nugget.
A philosopher Pitbull.
Are people born with these different abilities? Like some people are just better at habit forming, other than the divide between men and women? Because it's like I know men who are far more productive than women that I know. So it's like that can't the gender thing can't be accounting for all of it.
100%. Also, every gender thing that I mentioned, it's all averages. So
Sure.
every person is their unique individual, and you lie on the spectrum somewhere. I think in terms of habits, part of me thinks, I haven't done actual research on this, but what I've noticed in friends is if you didn't grow up with habits where like you didn't have a sport or you didn't have things outside of school where you were just kind of like roaming free, they tend to have a lot more trouble building structure around their life, and it requires a lot more intention.
So their discipline and their dopamine are kind of less intertwined for the people that are not motivated. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's hard. Discipline is one of those, I guess if you tie discipline to habits, dopamine is definitely involved. Yeah.
Okay, talk to me a little bit more about supplementation. What should people know that they're sleeping on?
Yeah, so number one, I think if you're a woman and you care about your skin, take collagen. It has been shown to work. There's thousands of meta studies showing that it can reduce wrinkles by 30%, improve elasticity by 9%, improve hydration by 15%. So if you're not on collagen, definitely get on it. I also love something called spermidine. This is a geroprotective supplement because it fights multiple aspects of longevity or of aging. And it's really great for cognition because it combats or improves something called autophagy, which is the spring cleaning of your cells. And our neurons really need that because they don't divide anymore. So it helps clear out the gunk in your brain and your whole body and improves cognition. It improves symptoms in mild cognitive impairment and Alzheimer's disease and connectivity to our memory regions like the hippocampus. Let's see. Everyone should be on magnesium, I think. I mean, the way our soil is, the vast majority of us are not getting enough magnesium, as well as B complexes. Those are great for women, especially because we tend to have weaker immune systems, and B complexes are great for that. I actually made a supplement that has all these things in it. It's called Aeonian. Yeah.
Incredible. It's interesting that you brought up, and I'm so glad that I asked, because the collagen thing, because I had heard that when you take collagen that it just metabolizes as protein. So that's inaccurate, right?
So collagen is this weird molecule where the vast majority of the peptides are made up of an amino acid called proline and hydroxyproline. And these are really unique amino acids because of their shape. They have this pentameric ring, and it makes it harder for enzymes to digest them. And now there's been 2 or 3 studies showing that those peptides actually make it to the bloodstream. And then they did studies where they actually gave people collagen and they pulled off their skin and looked, were there increases in collagen density? And there were. And they also did other like UV measurements in terms of measuring collagen density within the skin after collagen supplementation. And sort of really the only valid debate right now is, okay, is the collagen in the blood initiating your skin cells to build new collagen, or is it actually taking it up? We don't know that, but either way, from a consumer perspective, you're getting more collagen. So there's really no doubt in whether you should be taking it or not.
Best way to take it?
So if you don't like a powder, you can take pills. It doesn't matter. Just make sure that they're peptides, which most of them are. You can take both bovine or marine. There's equal evidence for both. It's really just up to you. Yeah.
What would the perfect day look like as far as self-care? Let's pretend for a second a woman has, or even a man, but I kind of want to focus it on women for our health purposes. You wake up, you have nothing to do all day. What do you do morning to night that is like the absolute most optimized routine for taking care of yourself for your longevity?
Yeah, so I love to wake up and get a workout in. So this obviously depends on what your workout split is, but if you could get a great hour workout in, then I prefer to sauna right after a workout because it helps with muscle growth. And sometimes when I do it too close to bed, it can actually increase my heart rate and it's harder for my heart rate to decline. So workout, sauna, then I like to meditate for an hour. Joe Dispenza is amazing. He's my favorite.
I love him.
He's the best. I am obsessed. Then I think working on something that you love or just reading about something that you're curious about, something that like fuels your passion And if you have a friend that likes the same thing, like do it with them. Or if you have a friend that you like to work out with them. And then getting a great, delicious lunch that's nutritious with maybe steak or fish and vegetables. And then going on a nice long walk after that, listening to a podcast, chatting with a friend, and then maybe reading a little bit and having dinner and going to bed at like 9 p.m.
No, that's perfect. Is there a cognitive benefit to reading?
Yeah. I mean, anytime that you're sort of having lifelong learning or improving using your brain, you're going to improve it. The thing that I think people get tripped up in is there's a trope of, you do Sudoku puzzles or crossword puzzles and you're going to prevent neurodegeneration. And the reality is you're just going to get better at Sudoku and crossword puzzles. You need to be exercising, sauna use, eating healthy. That's your best roadmap for cognitive longevity.
And then I didn't plan to ask this, but since you brought up Joe Dispenza, I always talk about manifesting like this because I do it, but I try to stay on the other side of the most woo-woo aspects of it, where I've kind of said before, and I've even mentioned on the podcast before, I'm like, if nothing else, the benefit of manifesting is that you're tricking your brain to be more positive, right?
Yes. No, there's actually, as much as manifestation is woo-woo and whatever, a lot of the people that actually talk about manifesting also talk about aligning your actions with manifesting. So it's really just about, to me, like visualizing your goals, which does have major neuropsychology behind it. So even like athletes, they've been trained to picture themselves winning, picture themselves, landing a jumper, swimming, however they're swimming, clearly not a swimmer. And those visualization techniques improve their performance. So why wouldn't you do that for your life? Everyone, should be manifesting and also aligning their actions. But yeah, I love Joe Dispenza for that as well.
Yeah, me too. I wonder how much of it, because then when you start to get into manifesting, there seems to be an area of it where you end up kind of feeling guilty if you're not at this like perfect high vibration all the time, which I don't think is realistic to achieve, right? I don't know that the very best version of me can wake up and go through that routine that we just went through and everything's going great. And I go outside and I get in my car and someone cuts me off and all of a sudden I'm pissed, right? And now my vibration is low. So it's like, how much of feeling mean or agitated or whatever, having a moment of low vibration, like it's not undoing the work, or is it?
No. And I'm by no means a manifestation expert, but even beyond manifestation, meditation, people talk about this where you meditate to get, calm, peaceful mind, and then someone cuts you off and you have irritation. The key is you want to be able to turn that off as fast as possible. And both meditation and visualization and manifesting, I think, give you the tools to switch on something else. So yeah, who can be high vibe all the time? Yeah.
What's your favorite form of meditation?
So I like The Blessing of the Energy Centers by Joe Dispenza, but I also do Vipassana and just focus on the breath with the gongs on YouTube.
It's good. It's an easy one because I don't think we can turn our thoughts off ever, no matter what, if you're the most meditated person.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even when I'm meditating, they're there.
They're there.
But it's interesting. It's made me a lot more conscious of thoughts that come up, because previously a thought comes, you run with it, and all of a sudden you're on this hamster wheel and it's like, whoa, how did I even get here? And now a thought comes up, I'll get on the hamster wheel for a little bit and then I'm like, wait, I don't need to be here. Okay, let's do something else.
What's happening for us chemically when that's going on?
That's a great question. So a lot of it is thought to be involved with something called the default mode network. And this is basically a series of structures in your brain that are active at rest. So when you're not performing a task, like in an fMRI machine, these are active. And these regions can change with meditation. And there's actually one region in particular called the precuneus, which they've done studies that show this is potentially your neurostructure for happiness. And happiness not in terms of like you're excited about something, but more just like your baseline level of contentment, which is what meditation truly works on. And people that meditate have sort of higher connectivity across this default mode network, and they have higher activation of this precuneus region. So it's really a shifting of this subconscious network that is the default mode network.
That makes a lot of sense, because I think sometimes what happens, there's this like perceived desire to be happy all the time, which seems to be impossible because you get a jolt of joy, you get some exciting news, what have you. You're dropping down below baseline to get back to baseline, right?
Yeah, what goes up must come down, especially with dopamine. Your brain is always trying to regulate. So if you have a big dopamine surge, whether it's from a relationship or a drug of abuse or something great that happened, it will go down. And especially if it was artificially high, it will go down much farther than baseline.
Should we do something to control for how excited we get about something in anticipation of the drop?
Yeah, so that's interesting. I've heard theories about this where if you sort of maintain your levels of dopamine from an exciting thing, you won't have as much of a peak, and then you won't have as much of a drop. But it's hard because it combats with this theory of reinforcing an action. So if you reinforce an action, you train that action faster. So you want to have some reward or reward yourself somewhat, but there probably is some argument that too much could lead you astray and also maybe take your eyes off the road for the longer goal.
What is a healthy way to reward ourselves that isn't going to be having a piece of chocolate when I accomplish something, because then that's going to have negative metabolic reinforcements, right?
Yeah. So I save songs and podcasts for times when it's like, okay, I get to reward myself. And then, so let's say, for example, Tuesdays, I have meetings all day. It's like the worst day for me. So I save my favorite podcast for that day. And when the day is over, I go for a long walk and I listen to my podcast. So it's kind of about just being creative and also restricting maybe things that you would immediately give yourself and saving it for that time where you need to pick me up.
That's such helpful advice. Is there anything I should have asked you that I missed?
No, I think we covered a lot of ground. That was great.
Yeah.
And we covered like the vast majority of the brain structures that we have.
Good. Well, we're using all of it. So
yeah.
We need to keep learning. Dr. Kay Linker, thank you so much for coming on today. Where can people learn more about what you're doing? Tell me about your supplement.
Yeah, so you can find me on both Instagram and TikTok at Dr. K Longevity. I just launched this female-focused longevity supplement, which I'm really excited about because I really couldn't find anything on the market. It has collagen, it has spermidine, it has vitamin B complexes, and it's in one powder that's just easy to drink. You're not taking a million pills, and I love it. It's called Aeonian, and yeah, check it out if you guys are interested.
Amazing. Thank you so much for doing the show.
Thank you.
And thank you, everybody, for listening. Bye.